What if the most dangerous cage in America has no bars? It has brand. What if the tears you just watched on the podcast are not the first real thing this woman has shown the world in 43 years? And what if every American who has ever bent themselves into a ape their family demanded and smiled through the breaking and sitting in the same chair right now? And you know what? What did Ivanka Trump hold it together through federal investigations, congressional testimonies, and an assassination attempt on his own father, but completely fall apart the moment someone asked out her grandmother? What did a woman trained from the birth to be a bulletproof, a woman who built an $800 million empire from her last name alone, need to stop a podcast interview to ask for these issues? And who thought her that crying was a weakness? And what did break her? What did the tears cost her? And what does it to the child's nervous system when her parents are catastrophic divorce is announced to America, one of the front page for the New York Post. While she is in the 9 years old, nobody in the house is allowed to fall apart. And what is the real psychological price of being a golden child? And why does that price always comes due to a middle age? And did Ivanka Trump get to grieve everything, or was a grief that a luxury the family brand could not afford? And what are the most emotionally devastated people in America always the ones who look the most put together? And what is the clinical name of the child who is raised to be a parent's emotional caretaker? And does every American family watching there right now has one of those children somewhere in the house? And when Ivanka Trump testified before the January 6th committee, and she said accepted that the election was not a stolen, what did that cost her that we have never been told? And here is the one nobody is asking: why did the dynasty produce a golden chain, a forgotten chain, and a destroyed one? And why does that exact same three child pattern show up in America's family after family, cost to cost? And I'm going to answer every single one of those questions today. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never see Ivanka Trump the same way again. I'm psychologically and spiritual investigator. I studied the architecture of human breakdown, the exact structural movement when a lifetime of a special performance finally runs out of the runway. And what happened to Ivanka Trump on the podcast was not a moment of weakness. It was a system failure. Decades of the making. This matters to every human, every American watch right now, because the mechanisms that broke these women down are not unique a billionaire. They live inside thousands of American families. The conditional love, the assigned roles, the unspoken rule that the family's image comes before anyone's pain. Here's the central truth of this entire investigation started plainly. Ivanka Trump did not break down because she lost her mother. She broke down because for 43 years she has never allowed to break down and the human nervous system. No matter how wealthy, no matter how trained, will not take the deal forever. That is the thesis. Now let us prove it. And for the first question, question number one: what was the original wound? Before the camera, before the brand. To understand Ivanka Trump's emotional breakdown, you have to go back one generation further than you think. You have to go back a man named Fred Trump, Donald father, who clinically evaluated doctor has described on record as a high functional sociopath. Fred Trump did not raise children, he manufactured competitors. His parenting style was bit difficult, and his parenting style was built entirely on conditional approval. You are only loved when you win. And when his oldest son, Fred Trump Jr., could not survive those conditions, he didn't survive at 11. He drank himself to death at age 42. And that was the family Ivanka Trump was born into. Not a home, a crucible. It's a curse. And what happened when Donald Trump's own mother disappeared? When Donald Trump was 22 years old, his mother, Mary Ann McClone, suffered a catastrophic hemorrhoids following an emergency surgery. She was gone from the household for months. And here is the part that never makes the headlines. When she came back, the family culture demanded that nobody acknowledge what happened, what had happened. The children were expected to function as if it was a completely normal, as if a mother disappeared for months meant nothing. That is not a family. That is a training program for emotional suppression, and Donald Trump exported that program wholesale to the next generation. Question number three. What role was Ivanka assigned from the birth? In clinical psychology, we call it a golden child dynamic. When a parent has a narcissistic personality structure, meaning their self worth is fragile and requires constant external validation, they assign their children roles. The golden child's job is to reflect the parent's perfection back to the world. Ivanka Trump shaped into the role of so completely and so early that it became an distinguishable from her identity. She was not a child who happened to be successful. She was a performance of success that happened to be a child. And every American parent watching this now, think about this. Think about whether you have ever looked at your child and seen yourself in a first. The instinct and extreme is where the story begins. And question number four, what did the divorce at age 9 actually do to her? At the age of 9, when Donald Trump and Ivana Trump's marriage collapsed in 1991, it did not collapse quietly. It exploded on the front page of the New York Post. The affair, the rage, the legal warfare. Ivanka Trump was a 9 years old. Now here is what the child psychology. Literally, it's very clear about child do not process parental divorce as a marital event. They process it a structural collapse of a safety. Their world is suddenly divided, and they must choose seriously a mother or a father, which parent to align with to survive. In the Trump family, aligning with the father was not optional. It was the condition of continued existence within the dynasty. So at 9 years old, Ivanka Trump began to process that would define that next 34 years of her life. She chose as the side of power, the side of grief. She chose the brand over the own. And question number five, what is emotional incest and did it happen here? Emotional incest, and that is the clinical term. I want to explain in clearly in a plain English right now. Emotional incest isn't a parent uses a child as their primal emotional support system. The parent lends on the child for validation, companionship, and ego regulation in a ways that are developmentally inappropriate. Multiple psychologists have documented and publicly analyzed the pattern between Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump. The way she was deployed as a surrogate partner at a political events, the way she as elevated as the one person in a room who could calm him, the way he publicly commented on her physical appearance in terms that made entirely press rooms uncomfortable. Holy shit. Folks, imagine being the child. Imagine your job. Before you are old enough to vote, being to emotional regulate a man that entire world cannot control. She publicly said physically employed. Question number 6. What happened to the children who were not a golden? In a narcissistic family system, there is always a scapegoat. The child who absorbs the family shadow, who takes the blame and carries the shame, and there is always a lost child, and who simply disappears into a background to avoid the warfare entirely. The three children pattern in the Trump family maps onto this framework with uncomfortable precision, and he uses the truth that every American family needs to sit with. And this is not a billionaire problem. This pattern runs through working class households in America, in Ohio, through middle class neighborhood in Texas, through the straight families is imagine, and immigrant families in California, the roles are the same. Only it takes the scorecode are different. Question number 7. What does it cost a child to be a perfect for 40 years? The golden child lives in a state of what narcissistic and neuroscientists call chronic hypervigilance. These nervous systems never fully relaxes, and excuse love in their experience is always a conditional. The, the mistake and the favor could be written. One sign of weakness and the role could be given to someone else. So the golden child disappears a superpower, an almost inhuman ability to read a room, to liberate their present situation, to suppress any initial reality that does not serve to external performance. The superpower has a that cost is that you spend 40 years not knowing who you are when nobody is watching, and then one day in a quiet room with a man who asks you about your grandmother, you find out the reason why she broke down is mainly the person behind it is her grandmother. Was Ivanka Trump ever just a kid? The research on this is not a heartwarming. By this time, Ivanka Trump was a teenager. She was already being groomed consciously and unconsciously for the dynamic role. She was placed in entire and borrowing and briding schools and studying in the schools designed to produce brand ready individuals. She was introduced a modeling to define her public presentation. She was present at business meetings, political functions, corporate events, not a child but a representation of a family's genetic capital. The American nation of childhood summers at the lake, scraping your knee, being allowed to be a mess was not available in the households, and you cannot grieve what you never had until one day you suddenly can, and then you cannot stop. And the psychology behind it is what is the clinical diagnosis nobody in America has had the guts to say out loud. Let me walk you through the clinical framework clearly, because this is where the investigation gets real. The condition most relevant to understanding Ivanka Trump's behavior is not a diagnosis of her. Specifically, I want to be precise here. It is a diagnosis of the family system she was raised inside. The system exhibits the documented hallmarks of the clinical psychologist called a narcissist family matrix. Plain English, the family where the ends and ego of one central dominant parent dictate the emotional reality of every other member, every action, every relationship, every career choice. With the family gets filtered through one question: does this serve the patriarch brand? Not does this even me? Does this serve him? Ivanka Trump has been answering that question his entire adult life. And question number 10: who is reaction formation and why does it explain the perfect exterior? Reaction formation, plain English, is when your unconscious mind is terrified of something, so it builds the exact opposite behavior on top of the fear to hide. If you are secretly terrified of being seen a weak, you build a presentation of absolute un- unthinkable strength. If you are secretly terrified of being ordinary, you build a brand of elite perfection. Think about every picture of Ivanka Trump you have ever seen. The posture, the smile, the tailored clothing, the precise long waist. That is not confidence, that is armor. And armor is only necessary when something need to be protected. Americans know this instantly. Who we have all met the person at the office who is never ever wrong about something, anything. Now you know what that cost them at the home. And question number 11, what is cognitive dissonance and how much of it can one person carry? Cognitive dissonance, and plain English, it is a psychological stress of holding two contradictory truth in your mind at the same time. You love someone, you also know they have done terrible things. You are loyal to your family, you also know the family has caused serious harm. You are assigned to the role of a public defender. You almost sat in a depositions of accepted under the word that central client your father asked you defend was. And as his own attorney general called it bullshit. That is not a political option. That is on the record and carrying the level of internal contradiction for years on a public stage while maintaining perfect hair and a $1 billion business simultaneously. That is not a just a stressful neurologically, it is a destructive. It depletes the exact systems in the brain that regulates emotion, so that when a safe questions comes and a simple human question about loss and love, and does and you are not able to hold that. And question number 12, what is displacement, and is that what we actually watched on the podcast? Displacement, plain English, in a plain English, is when your psyche cannot safely release emotional pressure through the real source of the pressure. So it redirects the entire weight onto something adjacent. So something safer, something socially acceptable. Ivanka Trump did not weep on the podcast because her mother's death was the largest trauma of her life. She wept because her mother's death was the trauma she was allowed to weep about. Every other source of in the family, the political exposure, the brand destruction, the January 6th, the testimony, the epigenetic sacrifice of her own reputation for the family empire, and none of that was safe to grieve in public, socially of it. And everyone's of the supposed anguish from decades of dynastic performance came out through the one available opening. And that is not manipulation, that is the human mind doing the only thing it knows how to do. When the pressure gets too high, it finds the smallest crack and breaks through it. And question number 13, what is the extra complex, and does it unlock the entire story? The electra complex, Carl Jung's framework, describes the unconscious psychological pull of a doctor feel towards her father, and the corresponding rivalry it creates with the mother. In a plain American English, when a narcissistic father rewards a daughter exclusively for her loyalty and her beauty and her performance on, on his behalf, and simultaneously diminishes and divorces her mother, the daughter faces an impossible psychological choice. Does she? It is very difficult, and simultaneously she feels not safe in her mind, and simultaneously diminishes the divorce her mother. The daughter faces an impossible psychological choice. Does she definite with the mother, soft, female, ultimately discord, or does the align with the father, dominant, powerful, financially unconquerable? And Ivanka Trump made the choice early, and she made it completely. She adopted her father's traits, the ruthlessness, the brand first mentality, the performance of invulnerability. She buried the maternal, receptive, vulnerable aspects of her self so deep that it took the death of her mother to begin pulling them back out. And here, why the real reason why she cried. Here, that is the real reason. The crack happened in her mind, in her thoughts. That real reason. And it's come to the question number 14. What is parentification? And is it abuse? Parentification, plain English, it is when a child is assigned adult emotional responsibilities, when a child becomes the emotional regulators of the household. A parent's public edges to present a face of family unity during a family public crisis. It is abuse. Clinically, yes. It is classified as the form of psychological maltreatment because it arrests the child's own development process. The parentified child never fully individuates, meaning they never fully become their own separate person because their entire identity is built around managing someone else's emotion reality. And every American therapist watching this right now just added. And because their writing rooms are full of these people, they just do not usually arrive in a chauffeured car. Question number 15. What is integrational trauma and why does money make it worse? And integrational trauma in plain English, it is psychological wounding that passes from a one generation to the next because the original wound was never processed. The first generation creates the trauma, the second generation inherits the copying mechanism and misunderstanding why they need them. And the third generation lives inside a fortress built for a war they never fought. And money makes his worse and not better. For a specific and cruel reason, wealth provides legal and financial infrastructure that actively protects the pathology from external intervention. No disclosure agreements, private attorneys, controlled media narratives, the mechanisms that work class families lacks to keep that dysfunctions contained, and which therefore force the family towards the therapy, towards revoking, and towards healing. The wealthy family can simply beauty by its way around. The wounds stay buried and the brand stays intact, and the golden child keeps smiling until she doesn't. Yeah. And question number 16. And what is amnesia? As no, sorry. And what is asmita? And is it the most accurate word for what we are seeing? I want to bring in a framework for ancient Indian philosophy here because it is frankly more precise than anything. In the DSM, for what we are looking at, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, one of the oldest psychological texts ever written, there is a concept called asmita. It means false identity, the deep misidentification of your true self with the external vehicles of your existence. Your name, your wealth, your brand, your family legacy. Asmita is listed as one of the five root causes of all human sufferings. And I want very American watching this is sit with this. And because Ivanka Trump is not suffering because she is a Trump, she is suffering because she believes, and at the deepest possible level, that being a Trump is all she is. And the tears were Asmita cracking. Now, because she's choosing, because the human soul, like the human body, and will not tolerate a life forever. And it's come to the healing part. Question number 17. What did moving to Washington actually cost Ivanka Trump? And here is the turning point nobody frames correctly. In 2017, Ivanka Trump has a real identity. Mysteriously, constructed, yes, but genuinely has a lifestyle brand, a fashion line, an image, and reasonable, moderate Manhattan socialite daughter, nearly $800 million in annual revenue. She was positioned perfectly for a world that was willing to separate her from their father's politics. And then she moved Washington, and in doing so, he did a political identity to an existing one. She surrendered the existing one entirely. She became that shield and softener, the human face of a political movement she could not fully endorse and could not publicly reject. She went up shit creek, and she handed the pedal to her father on the way in. And question number 18, what happened to the brand and why did nobody tell the full story? By 2018, the Ivanka Trump brand was under siege from multiple directions simultaneously. Consumer boycotts, retailer pullouts, and then the China trademark situation, which is the one mainstream American media never fully explained. While Ivanka Trump was serving as a senior federal employee, advising the president on their foreign policy. Her company was receiving expedite trademark and approval from the Chinese government. 21 of them. That is the conflicting of interest so direct that it would, and most political careers interested in it ended the brand. The business was shuttered in 2018, publicly framed as a personal choice. The Iphigenia sacrificed trading her business, her independent identity, her ethical credibility was complete. The father's empire survived. The daughter's empire did not. And how she feels that at the time, it's very difficult to leave that specific time. And what really happened in the January 6th testimony? Question number 19. When Ivanka Trump testified before the January 6th House Select Committee, she did something that was narcissistic family systems she was raised in classifies as an act of profound betrayal. She is accepted on the record the conclusion of her father's own attorney general that the 2020 elections was not stolen. The committee's own records note she was not being forthcoming. She was a story conveniently failed on the multiple critical points, but on that one statement, she was clear. And let us understand what it costs to say that. In a family where absolute loyalty to the patriot is the condition of continued belonging, accepting the truth that contradicting the patriot's central narrative is not just a political statement, it is a psychological act of surrender. She has to know it consciously, but her nervous system knew. That movement was the first public crack in the golden child armor, and the tears on the podcast. More than a year later, a part of that same fractured line has happened. And question number 20, where did the death of Ivana Trump do? Beyond a grief. When Ivana Trump died in July 2022, a sudden fall of age 73, it just not just remove a mother. It removed the one portion of the Ivanka Trump's life who occupied the same archetypal position, the woman who had also survived Donald Trump, the woman who had also bent herself into a shape the family demanded and paid a steep price for it. The woman who divorced for the Donald Trump became become the foundational trauma of Ivanka's childhood. And now she was gone. And with her went the unspoken possibility that one day they could sit together and say that Trump thinks out loud. The possibility, that deferred conversation that never happened. That is often the deepest grief of all. Not was lost. What was never said. That is what broke through on the podcast, and not a grief for the dead, grief for the conversation that can never happen now. And question number 21, what was there a moment she could have walked away? And why didn't she? There is a question if I find most revealing, and there was a multiple decision she points in Ivanka Trump's adult life, where the research suggests she could have maintained distance from the political operation, and where advisors urged her not to go to the Washington, where her personal cost was already visible. She did not walk away, and the clinical literature on a golden child tells us exactly why. The golden child does not stay because they want to; they stay because the terror of losing the conditional love, the only love they has ever known, is more overwhelming than any other cost. At 11 has no cattle as a brand, all sacrifices as a reality, and the child still comes when called, because the alternative to the nervous system feels like annihilation. And when it's come to the question number 22, you will get the real answer. What was happening in Ivanka Trump's brain during that podcast moment? Let me walk you through the neuroscience in plain American English, because this is not abstract. This is the most human thing. This entire investigation. The brain has a network of intercommunicated region called a difficult mode network. The DMN. Think of it, and at the part of your brain that maintains your story about yourself, your continuous narrative, your identity as a coherent person moving through time. For individuals living under chronic public scrutiny, individuals whose private animally emotional reality is in constant contradiction with their public personality, and the DMN is and perpetually under strain. It is running through two identities simultaneously, the real one and the performed one. And that takes a catastrophic movement of neurological energy, and the energy is finite. And question number 23, why did that safe question break what the hard question couldn't? And this is the neuroscience revelation that flips the entire story episode down for most Americans. During high threat situations, legal depositions, hostile interviews, congressional testimonies, the personality cortex, where which you brain's executive control control center is fully engaged. This is combat mode. This is suppressing the emotional center, the amyg, am, amyg, amygdala with a military grade top down force that mask hold because the threat demands the mask. But you know what? When it's come to and question number 23, why did the safe question break what that hard question couldn't? And this is the neuroscience reveals that flips the entire story upside down for most Americans during the high threat situations, legal depositions, hostile interviews, congressional testimonies. The professional cortex, which is your brain's executive control center, is fully engaged. It is a combat mode. It is suppressing the emotional center, and amygdala with military grade top down force. The mask holds because the truth demands, and she masked. And but on a podcast with soft lighting, a gentle host, a cup of a tea, the performal cortex and receives a false safe signal. It lowers its guard, and the amygdala, which has been accumulating decades of unprocessed emotional tension, fear, grief, suppressed rage, the exhaustion of performance. It does not wait for permission. It hijacks the nervous system, and resulting tears are not a choice, they are neurological pressure release event. And the brain finally found a movement it thought was a safe enough to let go. And question number 24, what does chronic hypervigilance due to a brain over 40 years? And chronic hypervigilance in a plain English, it is when your threat is a detection system. The amygdala is performing set to high alert, not occasionally permanently for individuals arised. raised in narcissistic family system, public scrutiny registers in a brain and a literal surviving threat, not metaphorically but neurologically, to a family, and with a same psychological response as a physical danger. Cortisol flooding the system and heightened sense of awareness, suppressed digestion and immune function. Over decades, these wears the brain's regulatory structure down the way a river wears downstream. The the prefrontal cortex, which is a suppressor to keep the emotional center to in a check, becomes chronically fatigued, and chronically figured systems fail, not spectacularly, quietly in a podcast studio with a box of tissues. And why does wealthy specifically amplifies the neurological damage? This is the important question, because in the wealthy persons in America need to know this. Here in the dark irony that I went every American sitting on a coach watching this is understand the very resources that should theoretically allows an ultra wealthy individual to access help, therapy, recovery, distance, rest, or the same resources that are deployed to prevent that access. The attorneys ensure legal silence, the NDS ensure the rational silence, the brand machinery ensures public silence, the dynastic loyalty demands ensures internal silence. Money does not buy healing. In a narcissistic family system, money buys better containment. It purchases a higher quality cage, and a golden child lives in that most beautiful furnished cell of all, right up to the moment the door finally swings open on its own. That's the golden cage. And chapter 26 and question number 26, who else have lived this story and how did it end for them? Let me take you through the parallel cases, because this is where the pattern becomes unmanageable. And first case, Athena Onassis, the stole hair of Aristotle Onassis, one of the wealthiest man in human history, and Athina Onassis lost her mother, Christiana Onassis, at age 3, and she was raised under the crushing weight on a dynasty legacy, not on her choosing, relentlessly media scrutiny, legal battles over foundational control, a father, Terry Rousseau, whose chronic infidelity replicated the relation chores of her grandfather's empire. And Athena publicly stated at age 13 that she wanted to burn all the Onassis money, that she blamed all her problem on the Onassis name. She chose absolute withdrawal of a total rejection of a family identity. She tried to destroy the Asmita by destroying the inheritance. Sounds familiar, right? Second case, Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy, an American woman who married into a dynastic mythology, the Kennedy family, and was consumed by the performance demands of the mythology, the curation, the public image, the loss of private selfhood to the service of a legacy. Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy showed every document sign of the psychological pressure we are discussing today, the anxiety, the weight of public scrutiny, the dissolution of private identity into a public role. She died at 33. The pattern does not always give you a podcast interview to break down in. And the third case is Patty Hearst, the American Hearst granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, who demonstrated in the most extreme possible form what happened when a gold child raised inside a dynasty of a powerful and a brand is suddenly removed from the family structure. The psychological literature on a Patty Hearst documents the near total dissolution of her previous identity once the family scaffolding was removed. When the structure that told you who you are disappears, you are capable of being almost anything. That is not a moral failure, that is the clinical inavailability for someone who was never given a self to help, to their own to stand on. And slow down. When it's come to the fourth case, Fred Trump Jr., a destroyed one, the scapegoat, the brother, the man who, by every account, was gentler and more emotionally honest than the family system would tolerate. He wanted to be a pilot. He wanted something that was his own, a patriarchal machine ground him down and then buried the lesson under a legal settlement and a family mythology about weakness. Fred Trump Jr. died at 42 from alcohol. He is the true shadow of the entire investigation. He is what happens to the child in the dynasty who cannot perform the golden role, and his sister lived inside the knowledge her entire all. And this sounds very familiar. And what nobody is saying here. And question number 27, why does Americans media always frame the golden child as complicit and miss the clinical reality entirely, missing the clinical reality entirely? And this is the truth that mainstream American political media will not touch because it's enquires empathy for someone who has been correctly criticized for serious choices. American political commentary has spent years analyzing Ivanka Trump as a political operative and as a beneficiary of nepotism, as someone who made conscious choices to normalize dangerous rhetoric. But all of that analysis has a legitimate basis, but it is simultaneously clinically incomplete because the golden child does not choose the role in a meaningful sense of the word. The role is assigned before language, before legacy, before the child has a framework for the different life might look like. The demand that a golden child simply sees through the system and walk away, like demanding that a fish notice the water. The whole part is that you cannot see what you are inside of from inside of that. And this is not a excuse, this is a diagnostic fact. And question number 28, what is the real story of genetic determinism? And what did it do to the children? And Donald Trump has public stated and multiple occasions has evolved that success and really and resilience are genetic, and that some people are simply born with and some people are not, and because it is a genetic, he says, and the right genes and some are not, and they are, and that you are either built for pressure or you are not. Think about growing up hearing that from your father. Think about what does to the psychological reality of emotional vulnerability. Every issue become a genetic failure. Every moment of doubt became a biological evidence of inferiority. Every human need for comfort, for stress, softness, for soft became proof that you did not inherit correctly. The dynasty here is trapped inside the belief system that classifies their own humanity as a defect, and they will suppresses the humanity publicly and privately for decades until the suppression itself breaks the system. This is not a Trump specific American pathology. This is what a culture of a hyper competitive results at all costs. Weakness is failure. Masculinity does to every family it enters. It is just more cameras in a particular house. And question number 29, what is the podcast doing that the interview room cannot? And here is the media analysis nobody in the America press crops is writing. The long form conferential podcast shows like the diary of CEO, the diary of CEO as something genuinely new in the American media ecosystem. They are not interviews, they are therapeutic simulations with a massive algorithm distribution backed. And the host acts as a surrogate therapist. The format creates the neurological experience of safety, soft questions, extended duration, and apparent intimacy while simultaneously recording everything for global consumption. For a media trained subject like Ivanka Trump, this format is a neurologically Trojan horse. The prefrontal cortex expects honestly hostility from interview. The podcast environment disarms the expectations, and then when the moment, the genuine human contact environment comes and it arrives, the question about a grandmother, the quiet acknowledgement of loss, the entire 43 years of suppressed emotional reality finds the door open to the first time. What you watched was not a performance of a grief. What you watched was a grief actually finding a room it through nobody important was watching. And question number 30. What is the American family system relationship of dynasty, and why are fascinated and repelled at the same time? America tells itself a specific story, the meri- meritocracy story, the self-made story, that anyone can make it story. This is the fundamental mythology of this country, and yet Americans are more obsessed with dynastic families than almost any other culture on the earth. The Kennedys, the Trumps, the Kardashians, the Murdochs. There is something in the American psychology that simultaneously rejects our aristocracy and cannot stop watching it. And I think the reason we could not look away from Ivanka Trump's tears in this, and it's come to the family, from a family dinner to Georgia, from an argument in a living room in Arizona. The specific details are a different, the structure of the wound is identical. And the question number 31, what does the myth of Iphigenia tells us the clinical literature cannot? And in a Greek mythology, King Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia on a altar, not because she was bad, not because she deserved it, because the empire needed wind in its sales, and a daughter blood was the currency the gods demanded. Iphigenia walked to the altar willingly, not because she wanted to die, because the love of a father, even a father who would destroy you, is the most primitive psychological need a human being carries. The myth is 5,000 years old. The pattern is describes is playing out right now in American families. In every tax bracket and every zip code, the daughter who breaks her own life open fills a father's need, and the daughter who mistakes sacrifice for a love, the daughter who walks to the altar smiling because she has been taught that her worth is measured by how much she can give. The pattern is not ancient history. The pattern has had $800 million in annual revenue and a senior White House security clearance. And question number 32, what does the yogic concept of vir- Verities tells us about the theos. And in the ancient yogic tradition, Patanjali describes the mind of a person living inside a false identity as a failed with verities, constant spinning mental fluctuations, relentless protective thoughts, anxiety loops that never resolve. He compares it to lake of disturbed, disturbed by wind that you cannot see the bottom. The calm surface of Ivanka Trump's public personality is not a piece. It is the surface tension of a lake in a permanent storm. Every public statement and every legal disposition, every media appearance is another guest of a wind, and keeping that surface churning. The vestal of reputation management, the verities of loyalty calculations, the verities of brand production, and those verities and the ancient traditions is very clear about this, drain the vertical life force and vital life force, not metaphorically and genetically and physiologically. The exhaust of a system and the exhaust of its finally encounters genuine stillness. A quiet room, a kind person does not maintain the performance. It collapses intro to the truth. And question number 33, what is energetic cost of carrying a dynasty? And can it be healed? in a framework of pranic healing and a subtle energy work traditions that are thousands of years older than your clinical psychology manuals. Every unprocessed emotional experience is recorded in your body's energetic field. It does not disappear, it is stored. And the biography of the wound lives in your body. And the longer it is suppressed, the more energetic resources are required to keep it contained. The golden child nervous system is not just a psychologically depleted, it is energetically exhausted from decades of life and life force and contaminate infrastructure for a pain that was never allowed to be processed. The tears on that podcast was not just psychological, they were the body finally doing what it has been building towards for 43 years. A force, involuntary clearing, and the energetic equivalent of pressure value that has been held close to long family and living way. And can this heal? Every ancient tradition says yes, but only one way. Not through more performance, through the exact opposite surrender or of the false identity. And it will be healed slowly, completely. And question number 34. What does this movement mean for every American family watching right now? Here is the ancient truth that every wisdom tradition from the Yoga Sutras to the static of African Ubuntu philosophy agrees on: you cannot heal what you will not feel, and you cannot integrate what you will not acknowledge. The American culture mandate to be and strong, to positive, to project success, to never let them see you sweat. The mandate is creating a general psychological depth in the country that is going to come due to way or another. It comes due to the therapist's office, it comes due to the divorce court, and it comes due to the addiction recovery center. It comes due to the podcast in front of the 10 million people who someone asks you about your grandmother and 40 years of loss answers for you, and the chickens always comes home to roast. In a dynasty of a complex, it will always arise. And the verdict here is the final truth, the one that makes the entire 45 minutes click. Ivanka Trump did not break down because she is weak. She broke down because she has been so catastrophically strong for so long in service of something that was never hers, and her own humanity staged a rebellion. The emotional breakdown was not a failure of a golden child, it was a golden child finally involuntarily beginning the become a human being instead. And here is the darker truth underneath that. The one should shake every American watching this to their core. The dynasty does not care. The brand machinery does not care. The family system that assigned the role does not care. The patriots does not care. The performance will be expected again tomorrow. The armor will be required to go back on. The verities will spin upon again. And Ivanka Trump will be back into that role because the role is the point in her life, the only identity she has ever been taught she is allowed to have. That is the real tragedy of a golden tear. Not that it fell, that after it dried, everything was still exactly the same. But American has spent decades watching this family as theater. What we should have been watching it is a mirror, not of wealthy, of what it costs every one of us in every American household, at every income level. When we raise a children to become a performance instead of a people, think about it. The tears of your ultra wealthy are not a distraction from your life, they are a warning about it. And I want every American watching this right now to ask themselves one question, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments. What role did your family assign you, and are you still playing it? Comment, please. Please comment. I am waiting for your comments. And for this type of psychological research, it takes so many days. It takes so much of time. It takes so much of pressure for me. But with your encouragement, with your click, one click on the subscribe button and like, it will give me so much of energy to do so much of research on psychology of the rich people or not a normal people in the psychology society. I will do it for you, but please subscribe my channel, and please like and write your opinion on the comment box. I'm waiting. Thank you very much.